30 years ago, they say Australian music came of age. A local group's first LP headed the charts for 4 months, selling 300,000 copies. Their second album did even better, making its debut at #1. The group was, of course, Skyhooks, whose explosion onto the music scene in outrageous costumes and full makeup delighted their audiences and outraged conservatives. Skyhooks' guitarist was Red Symons, who left the group in 1977 and made a new career in the media. He joins us now to remember the 70s world of Skyhooks.
Hello? A couple of months ago, a friend rang to announce he was taking me on a mystery flight. And so, intrigued, I found myself on an evening flight to Maroochydore on Queensland's Sunshine Coast with overnight luggage and sensible walking shoes, as instructed. In the morning we set off southward and then turned away from the coast into the hinterland where bitumen gave way to dirt. We drove as far as we could to the edge of a mountain. The rest was on foot. From there we scuttled 3 perilous steps at a time down the hill, clutching at the lantana to arrest any fall. Eventually we arrived at our inevitable destination, where it all ended. There, in the tangle of undergrowth overlooking the farmlets of the Sunshine Coast, was the wreckage of a helicopter, the last flight of Graham Strawn, Shirley to his friends, and that was pretty much everybody.
In the last moments before the helicopter he was piloting came crashing down, Shirley was pursuing a dream.
A woman would ask, "How did you feel?" But I'd felt about it and thought about it enough over the years that there was no sudden revelation. This was simply this, a piece of broken metal in the undergrowth, like a car wreck or a beer can. And besides, since the company was entirely male, the question asked was, "What do you think happened?" As though answering that question would change anything.
I'm living in the 70s, eating fake food under plastic trees. My face gets dirty just walking around. I need another pill to calm me down. I feel a bit nervous. I feel a bit mad. I feel like a good time that's never been had. I feel a bit fragile.
30 years ago, we were all kids, living in the hinterland, the leafy outlying regions of Melbourne, dreaming of the big smoke. Places like the Dandenongs, Eltham, Warrandyte. And bands used to play places like the Research Hall. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's the Research Hall, but after 30 years, it's really hard to tell.
Let's go to San Francisco. Let's go San Francisco. I'm so very high.
The Skyhooks, like all 70s bands, were a product of the 60s. When Dad came back from the war, he created a bulge in the demographic, and subsequently a population explosion heralded a pop explosion in the stoned and beatled 1960s. Sound travels at 1,200 kilometres per hour, but it took a decade for the effects to reach Australia. The 60s had been an era of political conservatism and cultural colonialism.
Time for freedom. Time for moving.
It was Whitlam's 70s that saw Australian music find its feet and hit its stride. As Gough observed, it was about time. Billy Thorpe's generic blues for fighting in pub car parks gave way to songs about middle-class ballmen, bohemian Carlton and snobbish and self-conscious Toorak. It was time for the Skyhooks, as it turned out. It began with two schoolmates, Greg McCainch and Freddie Strauks.
Fred and I went to Norwood High School in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and I first met up with him, I think, in 1961. We were in first form together. Everyone wanted to play the guitar, and we formed a high school band called the Spare Parts and played at the school fete and church dances. And Fred was a singer in those bands, and then we realised he was a much better drummer, and eventually he switched.
The Skyhooks played their first gig here at St Jude's Hall in Carlton in 1973. I was here, but I wasn't in the band. I was in the other band called Scumbag. The Skyhooks lineup at that stage was Steve Hill on vocal and included Peter Starkey as a guitarist. Curiously, I'd both lived in a shared household with Peter and learned a lot about playing the guitar from him. I'd also been in pure maths tutorials at Melbourne University with him. Strangely enough, it was his younger brother Bob that I ended up playing with.
My brother played in the band, and he told me one day he was playing in this band called Skyhooks, but he's going to leave. He was going off to play with Joe Camilleri, backing a stripper up on the West Coast. And he said, "Oh, come along and check it out." I think on the way home I said, "Oh, well, if you're leaving, you reckon I should audition?" He said, "Oh, well, give it a go." So I did. I put my hand up, and I think Greg hired me basically because he had no one else.
It has been said that bands are either successful immediately or not at all. My first gig with the Skyhooks was at a community hall in Leafy Research. We were the last act and the only ones to employ the curtain. When it opened, the entire audience suddenly stood, mouths gaping and red eyes widening at the spectacle of drag and makeup.
They're all staying home on the weekends. They're all doing what they're told.
The dressing up and the costume idea was something that I sort of wanted to do because there were a lot of bands in Melbourne who were good, but they just didn't really interest me to look at. And I thought, well, if I'm going to go out and see a band, what would I like to see? So the dressing up thing evolved.
I certainly loved the fact that they were so original, so different and so unique. And really, when I started Mushroom Records, that's what it was all about. After seeing them a few times, I loved the fact that the music was proud to be Australian, about Australia, and I loved the fact that everybody was wearing blue jeans and they weren't.
Sunbury Music Festival in 1974, with our biggest audience yet, was the Watershed. Prancing around in fey op-shop velvet capes with melting mascara in the mid-afternoon sun was as challenging for the audience as it was for the band. The "yous are all puffs" response was as demoralising as it was ungrammatical. Singer Steve Hill, sensing a lack of support from the rest of us, questioned his role in the band. We answered his question by not answering the question, and he duly left.
How's Melbourne tonight? Okay, we got a little song about the Toorak boys. Well, he's a bitty bay boy, Toorak cowboy, yes he is.
Add to the mix an apprentice carpenter whose surfing mates had awarded him the highest accolade that sporting male Australia can bestow, a girl's name, and we were on our way. Even if some people thought he looked like a poof.
People think you can't because of your actors.
Let me assure you, viewers, I am not a poofter.
Okay, something happened back around 1970. The revolution!
I think Sherlock brought to the message, you know, he was just a natural. Of course, he had a phenomenal personality. It was very engaging. It was a perfect addition, really. you couldn't have got a better mix.
Living in the 70s. Have you heard of it?
How many of you bought it though, eh? I'm living in the 70s.
Shirley joined in March 74. Living in the 70s was recorded in June, released in August, and by October had hit #1. With the kind assistance of the Federation of Australian Broadcasters, who banned 6 of the 10 tracks, it stayed on the charts for 40 weeks and sold an unprecedented 250,000 copies, 20 times gold.
Living in the 70s had a line in it about a call girl, which Ross Wilson said, look, you better change that. That's the title track of the album. It'd be nice if we got some airplay. So we changed it to, I used to say, I feel like a call girl that's never been had. So we changed it to, I feel like a good time that's never been had.
I'm living in the 70s. I'm living in the 70s.
Well, it was laughable. We thought maybe you might get, You Just Like Me Because I'm Good in Bed band or something like that. Or Smut, obviously. We thought that was definitely going to go belly up. But to get, I think we got 6 banned. And that was just like pennies from heaven, because if you're sort of trying to sell trinkets to teenagers, that was just fantastic.
You just like me 'cause I'm good in bed. You just like me 'cause I'm good in bed.
The first song 2JJ, later Triple J, ever played was You Just Like Me 'Cause I'm Good in Bed. It was Australian, attention-grabbing, and since Double J was part of the ABC, it could cock a snoot at the commercial broadcasters who banned it.
I came in one day and my staff were just freaking out. We've got a letter from the Australian Broadcasting Commission, letterhead. They're going to ban half the album. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? I said, we're going to do? Simple as this. I've never had an album in my life or heard one that they play all the tracks off that album. Let's be happy. They can only play 6. If you want to hear the other 6, they're going to have to buy it. So it really was a blessing in disguise, and it was something that just added fuel to the whole controversy of the Skyhooks.
I do sometimes find myself driving around town. I've got the kids in the car and I'll say, 30 years ago when Daddy was doing quite well in a pretty successful band, we used to play, and I realise that place isn't there anymore. Happily, the Ormond Hall, is still exactly as it was 30 years ago. Wherever we went, teenage girls who were coming to grips with their own sexuality sought some wisdom from ours. A lot of sobbing and screaming went on.
How many of you are 13 years of age?
Mike Willisey, who sought to promote what he was appalled by, invited us onto his program.
So we've got 13 and 14-year-olds, and you sing about things like orgasms and masturbation.
Oh, well, they probably know all about that. Yeah, see, the girl says, we're not naive.
Do you ever feel any responsibility about that? Would it bother you if you thought that you did lead youngsters astray?
Is orgasm and masturbation necessarily astray?
That,
we all do it, don't we?
Wholesome.
Come on. Go on. Tell the people in there.
All right.
Yeah, go on, do you?
So you're at the shop.
Right there on my TV. Horror movie right there on my TV. Horror movie right there on my TV.
Living in the 70s coincided with the advent of colour TV in Australia, and Horror Movie was broadcast on the first day of colour transmission on Countdown in 1975. We were riding a wave that we had created, perched aloft, waiting for it to break. When in doubt, escalate. We signed a deal for $1.5 million with Polygram Records to tour the US and recorded a third album in 60 cities in 60 days as a support act, playing for 20 minutes before middle-level English acts like Uriah Heep. We didn't make a big impression.
We should have gone overseas a lot earlier. If I would have known back then what I know now, they could have been bigger than Kiss ever were.
Take a surfer to the snow.
I think in terms of the band, it didn't augur well. It was the first time we'd been on the road together for, I think we were away for nearly 6 months or something like that, if my memory serves me well. And I don't think we'd been on the road for more than 3 weeks ever together. I got kicked out of the band twice, but never left. I think it was the beginning of the end. I think the reality hit that to make it in America, you'd have to do that for 4 or 5 years.
The wave had broken, and if we were to succeed in America, it was clear we would have to relocate and adapt. I don't think we could really be bothered. I can remember exactly where I was, in Atlanta, Georgia, in bushland, just like this, in 1976, where it suddenly dawned on me that I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. It was just work. Bands finish as they start, shedding members one by one. I left in 77, Shirley in 78, and in 1980 the Skyhooks disbanded forever and went away. For a minute. Through the 80s, we reformed a number of never-to-be-repeated times. In 84, on the anniversary of the first album, we played to 25,000 people at Olympic Park. Who would have thought that band of the 70s could squeeze out one more number one? Jukebox in Siberia, 16 years later in 1990. On the strength of it, we played 6 days a week for 3 months, and for the last time.
When coming from the cold to that jukebox in Siberia, pounding out a brick prison is waiting for you. You just smile while she touches screw.
There was definitely a chemistry there, whatever that is, whatever brought us guys together. It's something I only really recognised in latter years, after we'd stopped playing with each other for a number of years. Sometimes we'd come back after about 5 years of not playing together, and we'd just slot in a room, and it was just like, whatever that chemistry is, it was certainly there.
It was just weird that Australia, which is now such a proud, happy country, really felt that the import was better. And I think that the Skyhooks really helped change that, and Australian music really thrived after them. We achieved that much here, and we had that much fun, and there'd be most probably no Mushroom Records today without the Skyhooks.
I'm singing in my own band.
It all came back when Shirley died, which was really sad. You know, the realisation that, we can no longer be together again. And then you think of, just the way Red and Shirl worked together. There were some magic moments there, that basically on stage, in front of a crowd, taking the piss out of each other. And it happened in lots of places, and I think they were the best moments.
When my ageing contemporaries wistfully wonder what it might have been like to be in a successful, hugely successful rock band, I have the satisfaction of knowing. Thankfully, in the fast burn of 70s stardom, it was over quickly enough to necessitate getting on with the rest of your life with the rather smug feeling of been there, done that.
Red Symons walking modestly down memory lane. The producer was Marianne Latham. And Red Symons will be writing about his Skyhooks days in this week's Bulletin magazine, to be published on Wednesday.